Is it water with the sheep in the box?
If you're like me, you get into a whole lot of fights on the internet with defenders of capitalism, mostly centrists and liberals, who'll say shit like, how can you say billionaires shouldn't exist? Look how much they donate to charity and good works and so on and so forth. Usually they'll also argue that if we punish the rich, how do we encourage people to work hard? Assuming, of course, that capitalism is a meritocracy, which it demonstrably is not. Bill Gates and J.K. Rowling are usually the people brought up at this point, and don't worry, we'll definitely get to them in due course, but I think it's important to discuss this common point of contention because I believe that anyone with a shred of empathy or understanding should agree that the existence of billionaires is not only disgusting, but actively the main reason for a majority of problems with the world right now. From climate change to poverty to humanitarian crises, it's predominantly the existence of the super rich that is behind these issues. One might say that they're merely a symptom of the larger problem, which of course is capitalism, and I would be inclined to agree, but that doesn't mean that we should simply allow them to exist whilst we work to fight the economic system that created them. Even within capitalism, they cause a massive amount of damage and, above all, need to be stopped. Capital has always had an unjust level of power over the people in both direct and indirect ways, most obviously through lobbying power, but historically that's mostly been the purview of corporations. Now, however, one single man has almost $140 billion in personal wealth, and that's quite frankly an unacceptable amount of power for one person to hold, especially when that wealth could, and absolutely should, be put towards better and more worthy causes. Why should a minority of powerful people get to decide what a majority of the world's wealth gets spent on, especially when historically they've been so selfish and incompetent at it that world hunger, poverty, homelessness, water shortages, and avoidable deaths due to disease still happen despite it being within their power to fix it? Allow me to help explain to you why billionaires shouldn't exist.
We got the guillotine! We got the guillotine! You better run! We got the guillotine!
In order to be a billionaire, one has to necessarily forego traditional definitions and ideas of morality. In order to be a billionaire, you have to either confront or willfully ignore the simple fact that your wealth could materially benefit the world in innumerable ways. All you'd need to do is keep, say, 1% of your wealth to live an extremely decadent lifestyle, because even 1% of $1 billion is $10 million, and that's assuming that you only have $1 billion, not over 100 like Jeff Bezos, and donate the rest or put it towards other causes. In order to remain a billionaire, you have to consider your own wealth, which is so vast that it's functionally impossible to spend it all if you tried, more important than ending the suffering of those in the greatest need. Mike Bloomberg, for example, spent more money in his ultimately pointless attempt to become the Democratic presidential nominee than it would take to fix the water crisis still ongoing in Flint, Michigan 10 times over. But he chose not to help people or improve the world in any appreciable way, because why should he bother? The poor aren't going to provide him with any material benefit, and some of them are black and or female, and we all know how Bloomberg feels about women and black people. Likewise, there are basically only two real ways to become a billionaire: inheritance, like the Trump family who inherited their wealth from an elder patriarch, or exploitation of the working class and capitalist system in order to build wealth on the backs of the broken and brutalized workforce. This is how Jeff Bezos can be the richest man on earth whilst Amazon pays no taxes, and the people who work in their warehouses are forced to live in tents and piss in bottles because they're paid poverty wages and not given adequate toilet breaks in order to maximize profits and efficiency. And recently, it was revealed that they're trying to force their workers to wear electroshock bracelets, which will punish them for falling behind on often unrealistic quotas. If you're rich enough, you get to dictate the terms of the economy to the government, not the other way around. There is no such thing as a moral billionaire, even if they make a whole performance out of their humanitarian work. More on that later.
We got the guillotine! We got the guillotine! You better run! We got the guillotine! We got the guillotine! You better run!
It's very difficult to conceptualize this, and especially to understand the vast gap between a billionaire and the average worker, or even a billionaire and a multi-millionaire, which are also bad, but quite frankly not even vaguely comparable. $1 billion is more than the GDP of 13 nations. If you were to earn $100,000 per year, it would take you 10 years to earn $1 million. To reach $1 billion would require you to save every penny you earn, with no expenses, rent, mortgage, food, anything, for 10,000 years. 1 million seconds is less than 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 32 years. We could go on about this forever, like $1 million in $100 bills would be about the height of a chair, and $1 billion in $100 bills would make a stack taller than any currently existing structure on Earth. This shit is why people trying to argue that Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn are hypocritical or in some way on the same level as Bloomberg or Richard Branson are being ridiculous. Because whilst I still believe that $1 million is too much wealth for one person to have, $1 billion isn't even comparable, and any more than that is just an atrocity.
We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine. You better run. We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine. You better run.
The rich have the power to solve almost all the world's problems, and yet choose not to. Just one man has enough wealth to end world hunger and poverty, provide clean drinking water for everyone on the planet, and solve homelessness forever, and yet he chooses instead to abuse his workforce and waste his money on yachts and mansions. Imagine that, holding the power to end almost all problems caused by wealth inequality and choosing not to use it because you benefit from wealth inequality. This is one of the main reasons I started my How Capitalism Ruined Your Life series. The profit motive, and by extension capitalism, is one of, if not the sole, driving factor behind all the struggles we as a society face. And here we see it manifest. We have created a society in which it is socially and morally acceptable in the eyes of a majority of people to hold the world's poor to ransom, to choose to let children starve to death, to allow billions to die of preventable means when you hold the power to stop it. Defenders of capitalism, or as we on the left like to call them, bootlickers, love to say that capitalism has helped millions out of poverty, and yet seems not to want to engage with the fact that capitalism could help everyone out of poverty if the majority of wealth wasn't being hoarded by greedy dragons sitting atop their mountains of gold, because capitalism incentivizes profit over people, margins over humanity, and cruelty over kindness. World hunger, poverty, homelessness, water crises, etc. will never be solved whilst the means to solve them are being hoarded by those at the top of the capitalist hierarchy. Billionaires love to act like they're doing good because it's great PR, but they're incentivized not to actually help people. There's no money in that. Speaking of PR stunts,
We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine. You better run. We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine. You better run.
Jeff Bezos recently announced that he was going to donate $10 billion, aka 7 or 8% of his overall wealth, to an initiative to combat climate change, and this has been touted as an example of billionaires' philanthropy being a net positive. Other breadtubers have made whole videos about this, so I'll be brief, but suffice to say that it is not. In truth, what it is a method for the super rich to control how progressive change happens, because once again, Bezos could use his wealth to mitigate the effects of climate change and ensure that things don't get too much worse, but doesn't, of course. And let's not forget that in 2019, the 500 richest people in the world increased their wealth by $1.2 trillion, an increase of 25% in a single year. Also relevant, the richest 10% of people worldwide are responsible for nearly half of global emissions, yet the tax rate paid by American billionaires fell below that of the working class in 2018, and all their philanthropy actually reduces the tax they pay. Amazon, one of the most valuable companies in the world, paid no federal tax in 2018, instead receiving a $129 million tax refund. That's right, you, the taxpayer, pay the richest man in the world to exist, not the other way around. As Anand Giridharadas put it, of course, world-changing initiatives funded by the winners of market capitalism do heal the sick, enrich the poor, and save lives, but even as they give back, American elites generally seek to maintain the system that causes many of the problems they try to fix, and their helpfulness is part of how they pull it off. Thus, their do-gooding is an accomplice to greater, if more invisible, harm. A successful society is a progress machine, turning innovations and fortuitous developments into shared advancement. America's machine is broken. Innovations fly at us, but progress eludes us. 1,000 world-changing initiatives won't change that. Instead, we must reform the basic systems that allow people to live decently. The systems that decide what kind of school children attend, whether politicians listen to donors or citizens, whether or not people can tend to their ailments, whether they are paid enough and with sufficient reliability to make plans and raise kids. There are a significant number of winners who recognize their role in propping up a bad system. They may be convinced that solving problems for all at the root will mean higher taxes, smaller profits, and fewer homes. Changing the world asks more than giving back, it also takes giving something up. And let's not forget that Amazon has recently been aggressively courting oil and gas companies with its cloud computing services and threatened workers who campaign for stronger climate action with dismissal. Its push for ever faster delivery times, as little as 1 to 2 days in parts of the country, also comes with an environmental cost, as well as the toll it takes on workers. Jeff Bezos does not give give a shit about the environment, just like Bill Gates doesn't really give a shit about African kids. More on that in a moment, because if he did, he would just use a majority of the money he already has to mitigate the effects of climate change or actively oppose the system that incentivizes exploitation of the planet, but he doesn't do that. He just gives money he won't miss to research into methods of fixing the problem without having to change the system, because if he didn't, people might start to get a little upset when shit hits the fan, and he wants to avoid the pitchforks as people slowly begin to realize the real reason their communities got flooded, burned, or destroyed by hurricanes was the rich sacrificing the planet on the altar of profit.
We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine. You better run. We got the guillotine. We got the guillotine. You better run.
This new breed of performatively philanthropic billionaire are described by Slavoj Žižek as liberal communists, people who claim to want to usher in equality and justice whilst benefiting from the current unequal and unjust system and actively opposing anti-capitalist sentiment, attempting fixes within capitalism and liberal ideology, a contradiction that should not be lost on anyone. According to liberal communist ethics, the ruthless pursuit of profit is counteracted by charity. Charity is part of the game, a humanitarian mask hiding the underlying economic exploitation. Developed countries are constantly helping undeveloped ones with aid, credits, etc., and so avoiding the key issue, their complicity in and responsibility for the miserable situation of the third world. As for the opposition between smart and non-smart, outsourcing is the key notion. You export the necessary dark side of production, disciplined, hierarchical labor, ecological pollution, to non-smart third world locations, or invisible ones in the first world. The ultimate liberal communist dream is to export the entire working class to invisible third world sweatshops. We should have no illusions. Liberal communists are the enemy of every true progressive struggle today. All other enemies, religious fundamentalists, terrorists, corrupt and inefficient state bureaucracies, depend on contingent local circumstances, precisely because they want to resolve all these secondary malfunctions of the global system. Liberal communists are the direct embodiment of what is wrong with the system. It may be necessary to enter into tactical alliances with liberal communists in order to fight racism, sexism and religious obscurantism, but it is important to remember exactly what they are up to. Okay, let's acknowledge the contract with ice in the room. As I was working on this video, ThoughtSlime released a video covering Bill Gates, and obviously I'm not going to be able to go as in-depth on why Bill Gates specifically is not a positive influence on the world, or his and his foundation's many shady dealings and business practices as they did. Luckily, that's not really the point of this video, so I'll link ThoughtSlime's video below because it is a good summary and definitely helps aid this discussion. Suffice to say, Gates is not quite as squeaky clean as his image may imply. Likewise, Rowling's reputation as the woman who is no longer a billionaire due to charitable donations, though she has recently become a billionaire again, is little more than a poorly written fantasy story, but to be fair, that's J.K. Rowling's wheelhouse anyway. She has various charitable foundations to her name, like Gates, and yet maintains an absurd amount of personal wealth, a majority of which she doesn't give to charitable causes or use to improve the world. What I want to talk about is the idea of billionaires as philanthropists and how that concept is used as a method of justifying their existence. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, anyone on the left who's ever got into an argument with a bootlicker has had this thrown in their face. You think billionaires shouldn't exist, eh? What about all the charity work they do? Did you think about that, huh, Buster? This even happens with fictional billionaires, for fuck's sake. The people Tony Stark fucks over are always the bad guys.
Peter, you're young. You don't understand how the world works.
Yeah, but I understand that selling weapons to criminals is wrong.
How do you think your buddy Stark paid for that tower? Or any of his little toys? Those people, Pete, those people up there, the rich and the powerful, they do whatever they want. Guys like us, you and me, they don't care about us. We build their roads and we fight all their wars and everything. They don't care about us. We have to pick up after them. We have to eat their table scraps. That's how it is. I know you know what I'm talking about, Peter.
Why are you telling me this?
Because I want you to understand.
To the man who brought us all together, our former boss, Tony Stark. The Jester King, literally wrapped in wealth and technology that he was unfit to wield. Like the holographic system I designed, a revolutionary breakthrough with limitless applications that Tony turned into a self-therapy machine and renamed
Binarily Augmented Retroframing, or BARF. Oh, $611 million for my little therapeutic experiment.
He renamed my life's work, BARF. I told him it was a mistake, that my technology could change the world. And then He fired me.
Did Janice?
After Tony died, she was the one who discovered that Edith was being handed over not to us, not to the Defense Department, but to a child.
Thank you. Janice!
And to the rest of you, Tony Stark is gone. There is a window of opportunity and someone will step up. But these days, you can be the smartest guy in the room, the most qualified, and no one cares. Unless you're flying around with a cape or shooting lasers from your hands, no one will even listen.
But the billionaire who invades people's privacy, hoards technology that could save lives and even the planet, and crossed international borders in order to carry out extrajudicial executions, potentially triggering World War III in order to take admittedly justified revenge on a terrorist cell, is the good guy here. And he's supposed to be mostly ideologically aligned with Captain America, apart from that one time, the man who is defined by his dislike for bullies. Batman is one of the world's richest men who uses his immense wealth to facilitate beating the shit out of petty criminals rather than actually helping resolve the root of the crime problem in Gotham, because that doesn't help him violently act out his revenge fantasies, and billionaires are great at performatively addressing the symptoms of a problem whilst avoiding acknowledging real systemic issues causing them. We're told repeatedly that billionaires are mostly just special geniuses who got their wealth and power by being exceptionally smart or some shit. Never mind that Elon Musk's workers and ununionized employees are the ones who actually created most of the achievements attributed to him despite his mistreatment of them, an apparently conscious decision he's so often lauded and celebrated for, or the fact that he can use his immense wealth to improve the world in immeasurable ways, but instead wasted it on gatekeeping space travel and electric vehicles for the super rich. Tesla is the primary electric car brand, and they're about on par with Porsche at this point. SpaceX may be worshipped as the coming of Star Trek, but all privatized colonization of Mars really means is the film Elysium made real, and that movie was intended to be an extremely transparent critique of our current economic system and the inequalities contained within.
Ah, hello, madam.
The fact is that billionaires, by their very existence, are making a conscious choice to increase their own astronomical wealth rather than helping people in need. As previously mentioned, if they wanted to, they could give away 99% of their wealth at any time and still be fabulously, absurdly rich. But they don't, of course. £1 million could give me the average UK wage from now until death, and 1% of £1 billion is £10 million, or 10 times the average UK wage for around 50 years, and some people have tens or even hundreds of billions of pounds of personal wealth. To hoard billions is to openly declare and be comfortable with the idea that a tiny number of rich bellends living an extravagant lifestyle is preferable to the eradication of poverty, world hunger, avoidable deaths by disease, and so on. Oh, and the small matter of averting the coming climate apocalypse. But let's for a moment pretend that we live in a world where billionaires give an appreciable portion of their overall income to good causes and materially improve the world. Why should they be the ones who get to decide how half the world's wealth is distributed? The fact of the matter is that if a small amount of people get to control all the money, they're still going to want to use it to benefit themselves and their own interests. Even with charitable works, they're not doing what they think will actually do the most good, because if they did, they'd just give away a majority of their wealth to provide a decent life for everyone on the planet, end world hunger, poverty, and save the planet. And as we've already discussed, they absolutely could do that, but choose not to, because getting your photo taken with impoverished African children in the school you just built is excellent PR, but giving enough money to provide free education for everyone on the planet, which again is totally possible, is just socialism, and that'll never go over well back home, where people will say we should look after our own first, even though they have no intention of looking after their own, as evidenced by the coexistence of empty homes used for investment or holiday purposes for the rich alongside rampant homelessness. Even when it comes to charity, the billionaires still have all the power and get to make all the decisions with the money. No, fuck that. Tear the system down, take away their power, and definitely take away their money. The people should decide how to use the world's money, not a small cabal of scheming, self-serving oligarchs.
We should also bear in mind to what extent what I called objective violence, violence caused by the functioning of today's global system itself, is in a false way counteracted by not subjective violence, but subjective, how should I put it, clarity activities. Which is why, for me, if Bill Gates is an icon today, not so much because, you know, virtual capitalism, Microsoft, but how he combines the most ruthless abstract capitalism, you grab billions of dollars, with this heart-bleeding, warm tolerance. If I were to pick the most disgusting photo of the last couple of years, it is in New York Times about a couple of months ago when Bill Gates visited India. Him and his wife in an Indian village embracing some in a hospital ill children. You should have seen that pathetic expression and so on. In other words, I claim that it's not enough today to say, oh, but people are starving, we should help them. It's part of today's system to refer all the time to this threatened outside. You know, Bill Gates is saying all the time, what does it matter, all the computers, if people are still unnecessarily dying of diarrhea and so on and so on? What's the function of this humanitarianism? I'm more and more convinced to create a false sense of emergency.
We got the guillotine! We got the guillotine, you better run! We got the guillotine! We got the guillotine, you better
Fuck right off. This one is pretty easily debunked, but let's attack it on two fronts. First, the advent of automation and labour-saving technology means that there is going to be less and less work in general, but work is not, and never should be, a necessity in order to get access to adequate resources to live a decent life. Secondly, not only would jobs still exist without billionaires, because the work to provide for society's needs would still need to be done, but this is a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between worker and capitalist. Your boss didn't give you a job out of the kindness of their heart, they needed someone to help them make money and decided to exploit you by extracting almost all of the value of your labour in order to build up their own personal wealth. If they weren't making money off you, you wouldn't have been hired, simple as that. In the same way, landlords don't give you a place to stay out of a sense of altruism and helping their fellow people. They helped create and contribute to a system in which you have no choice but to give them a massive chunk of your monthly income simply because they own all the property and almost no young person can or will ever own a home. Your boss is not your friend. I don't want to be a billionaire. When I say billionaires shouldn't exist, I mean even if I somehow became one. If I was given £1 billion, I would keep enough to give me a decent wage between now and the day I die, and then I'd just give the rest away. I think that the existence of billionaires is immoral on a deep philosophical and existential level. It's not some weird thing where I wish I also had a yacht, because I don't. My ambitions are more along the lines of fight for a better world and a decent standard of living for all than make as much money as possible. In fact, I have very few personal ambitions because I have more concern for society at large and those contained within it than simply living as decadent a life as possible. Ridding the world of billionaires is at its heart an act of self-defense and self-preservation. In fact, it could be argued that it's actually a charitable act. Billionaires existing cause the world to be a demonstrably worse place and actively cause, or at least allow, tremendous amounts of pain and suffering to happen simply by their very existence. To my mind, a society being intolerant towards billionaires is comparable to a body being intolerant towards a malignant cancerous tumour, but maybe that's just me. Also, when we say billionaires shouldn't exist, we don't necessarily mean we want to kill all billionaires. We mean it should be impossible to own $1 billion. Sure, if they refuse to give up their wealth, then we might be forced to resort to other means, but only as a last resort. Fuck aspiration. Don't make me play that Charlie Brooker clip again. Look, I know the argument is that if we regulate income, then the poor will have nothing to aspire to and therefore won't bother to start an online bookshop, a totally unique concept that the world couldn't live without, and an achievement absolutely worth $150 billion, unlike helping people in need. I could go into the fact that throughout history, so much progress and innovation has been carried out without the profit motive in mind, and free from any monetary incentive. Penicillin being the obvious example here, but I don't even need to do that, because getting rid of billionaires doesn't mean that there's no no more rich people. As we've already established, one can be fabulously, absurdly wealthy without necessarily being a billionaire. Or are you telling me that aspiring to have $100 million, which is still far too much money for one person to have in my opinion, is somehow different to $1 billion, thus necessitating the existence of people like Jeff Bezos? In a way, yes, but so is building a vast business empire on the backs of the poor, impoverished and exploited working classes in order to increase personal wealth to absurd levels. Taxation on the super rich is theft in the same way a starving person stealing food from Tesco's is theft. It will not materially harm anyone, the victim won't even notice it's gone, and the fact that it's necessary in the first place is a sad indictment of our modern capitalist society. Billionaires should not exist. It is impossible for billionaires to exist in a just society. It is impossible to become a billionaire without being or becoming a monster without empathy. $1 billion is too much money for any one person to hoard, and more than that is just absurd in its cruelty. Performative altruism when it comes to climate change or even providing assistance to people in the third world is not a net positive in the world. These people could end the systemic issues they claim to care about basically overnight and yet choose not to because putting a band-aid over the problem doesn't cost them a huge amount of their wealth, makes them look good, and gives them an excuse for not providing the help required. It's better than nothing, but certainly not an actual fix. Billionaires are a net negative influence on the world, and if you continue to defend them, then sorry, I'm going to call you both a bootlicker and someone who actively doesn't care about the poor and most vulnerable in society. You're never going to become a billionaire, mate. Stop acting like protecting their rights is going to pay off for you in the long run. You have 1,000% more in common with an African peasant or a homeless guy in a British high street than you ever will with Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates.
Is it water with the sheep in the box?
Hello everyone, it's been a while, hasn't it? I did mention that my video output was going to slow down dramatically, and I was right, it has. I'm still working on stuff, but obviously I have much less time to do so. I'm basically doing this on weekends and evenings, but I do of course also have a social life outside of that. So as I said, things have slowed down a little bit. But of course, as it is the end of the video, I am here to thank all of my patrons who are currently being displayed on screen. If you want to join them, you can head over to my Patreon and donate $1 or more. You can also check out my Ko-fi for one-off donations, follow me on Twitter if you like, or ask me a question on Curious Cat. And now to finish off the video, I especially want to thank my $5 or more patrons. So today, I especially want to thank Calliope, Cedar, or Sylvester in Drag, Chris Ragnacci, Emily, Nanza Kambe. Next we have Ryan, it's Brian, Pixels Green, Stacey Solano, Susie M, Theodore Pekelarov, Thomas McCallum, and Tom Newport. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you again at some point in the future, but unfortunately I can't say next week. I don't know when it'll come out, but it will be relatively soon. In the next few weeks anyway. Have a good one. Bye!